I seriously considered purchasing a gun for self-protection. My name is Nancy Salem. I am 32. I live in Michigan, the US. I am Egyptian, but I was raised in America, so I spent my whole life there. And I come to Egypt for vacation once a year. I'm married and I have a 3.5-year-old son. We started hearing about the COVID-19 pandemic from the news. When we got notified, it was March. I remember exactly the date. Actually, it was March 10th. We got notified that the local schools were closing for the weekend, and they were going to make it a long weekend. So they were going to close Thursday, Friday through Monday, in hopes that by Monday they will have figured out what's going on, and then life will resume as normal that following Tuesday. So March 10th, we got notifications from my son's daycare that there is no more school until further notice, which hopefully won't last more than the following week. We were not confused, but kind of in disbelief. Like, is this really happening? We had the news channel on 24/7, of course. Okay, so that same night, I think it was March 10th or 11th, I woke up at 2 a.m. to the sound of a very, very dry cough, which was terrifying because all we knew about the virus at that point was it's a deadly virus that had attacked a cruise ship on the west coast of the United States, and that people were stuck on the cruise ship, and this virus was coming from China. It's an unknown virus. Nobody knows what's going on. People are dying. So when I woke up to the cough, it sounded like a old person's cough, and my mother-in-law was visiting at that time. I initially thought it may be her. She got up in the middle of the night. Maybe she got up to get water or something. And then I heard the cough again, and I realized it was my son, my 3.5-year-old son. So that was terrifying as a parent. Of course, I immediately called the doctor's office the following morning. I checked to make sure he didn't have a fever. He thankfully didn't have a fever, or it wasn't that high. So we waited until the doctor's office opened, and I went in and we took an appointment. So this was our first venture out since it was confirmed in the United States that there was a deadly virus going on. So of course they were not seeing normal patients. They were seeing only emergency cases, and they were directing us to sit in far away rooms, far away from the front desk.
Have a seat, I will call you from in there.
Thankfully, after we saw the doctor, we learned that he has something called whooping cough, which is a virus. It's a virus, but it's like a cold or like the flu that is common amongst children. And it's just my luck that the symptom is dry cough, but thankfully he got over that after a couple of days. But then the lockdown began, and we were stuck at home for what turned out to be, in the end, from March until maybe June, when things started officially opening again. So for me, the lockdown experience was initially terrifying. It felt like it was the end of the world. It was an apocalyptic movie, straight out of an apocalyptic movie. The entire country shut down basically overnight. Everyone went into panic. The supermarkets were empty. When I say empty, I mean there was nothing left on the shelves. Everyone was panic buying, from toilet paper, which I'm sure you heard of on the news, to canned goods, to anything perishable. There was no more produce, no more products to buy. And I started to panic. I remember being in the supermarket, frantically trying to grab anything off the shelf that would help us, live throughout the following week. And I mean, until now, I have things that I purchased at the time that I don't think I will ever use. But I bought it because I was scared that we would not find food. And I remember thinking, what am I going to feed my son? My son is 3 years old and he's very picky. And it was as if it literally felt like the world was ending. Like we don't know what's coming tomorrow. It felt like we would not only not have access to food as readily as we did, but it also felt like the people would start looting. And when I say looting, I mean they attack neighborhoods, they attack supermarkets, and then in states of panic, when these issues are not resolved, they start attacking homes and invading homes. I considered ways in which we would bar up the windows and the doors to our home. I considered getting an alarm system, although because of political riots that were happening at the same time, those two things overlapped, but it was scary. It was very scary. Later on in the quarantine, when things calmed down a little bit, and then, toilet paper started reappearing on the shelves and food was becoming more readily available. I mean, still at some point in quarantine, like about 2 months in, we still wouldn't find bread easily. Of course, the variety of which we were used to was not there anymore. Choices were very limited, which is not what we're used to as Americans. We're used to having so many options. That was no longer available. Everything was with a limit. So you would enter the supermarket and they would not allow you to purchase more than 1 carton of eggs, 1 carton of milk, 1 roll, 1 package of toilet paper, for example. So there were some essential items that were later, they placed limits on so that people would have access to that. No, I was not alone during lockdown. So it was me and my husband, who's a doctor, and my son, who was 3.5 years old. And at the time, my mother-in-law was visiting us, and so was my sister-in-law, and she was pregnant. She was 7 months pregnant at the time. So that was in the beginning of the lockdown. That was in March. So my husband is a doctor and he's a cardiologist, interventional cardiologist to be specific. So he was one of the very essential healthcare workers, because as we know, the virus not only attacked the lungs, but also this affected the heart. And he, aside from the virus, he would have to perform emergency catheterization or surgery on regular heart patients. So the hospitals were closed down for all elective surgeries, but all emergency services were still intact, and he was resuming life as normal as a doctor. It was tough. It was tough to be living with someone in the midst of a pandemic who was exposed to the virus on a day-to-day basis. In the beginning of the lockdown, there were not enough, I'm sure you guys heard on the news, there was not enough, so there wasn't enough ventilators, there weren't enough masks to go around. Nurses were not given, they were given N95 masks, and they had to keep their N95 mask intact. They were given to them in paper bags. If they lost it, it was too bad, because the country all of a sudden shut down. We had no stock, no access to anything coming from outside of the country, so we were low on all of the tools needed to help fight the virus. So knowing that, the PPE in the hospitals is low and there isn't enough access to preventative tools, and having the doctor come home to you every night, that was scary. It was terrifying. We had a routine in place. He would come home wearing his scrubs. He would have to, I placed a laundry basket in the at the entrance where he would come in, and he would have to remove. I told him he has to remove all of his clothing. We would sanitize him down. He would go upstairs, take a shower right away. There's no interaction with him until after he was, clean, showered, and everything was sanitized. And obviously the scrubs and all of his coats and everything were washed on a daily basis. So for me, the lockdown started off as it was a very tough experience initially, because we were all terrified. There was this sense of terror. It was almost like an apocalyptic movie initially. So my experience with the first part of quarantine or lockdown was not exciting. It was very anxiety provoking. It literally felt like we were in an apocalyptic movie.